So then what about your servlet? Tomcat container, when I start, it will create a servlet context object. For each servlet, it will create a servlet config object, and whatever the data, context data I have here, that context data it will put under servlet context. Whatever the init parameters data I have here, that one it will keep under servlet config. Okay, so then what your servlets? For your servlets, what it will do here? I have A servlet, B servlet and C servlet. I have a servlet A and I have a servlet B. So for this each servlet, we need to have servlet mapping here. For A servlet, we need to have mapping. For B servlet, we need to have mapping. But we don't have any mappings here. Keep mappings. How we can create mappings? In between servlet mapping and mapping. For each servlet, you need to have one servlet mapping. So in between this servlet mapping and servlet mapping, again servlet name, I have A servlet, servlet name, then URL pattern. So here I have some URL pattern, something, keep any pattern here, A servlet, URL pattern. Then again for B servlet, servlet mapping, servlet name, B servlet, and URL pattern, something B servlet. So when this servlet objects your container will create, somebody need to request your servlet container. In the form of what they need to request? By using this pattern, if they request, it will send its request to A servlet. If you pass a URL pattern request B servlet, it will request your B servlet here. So once if I pass a request from any browser, if I pass a URL like this, http://localhost:8080/application name hello world /A servlet. If I request it for A servlet, so then your container will do what? When I request for A servlet, it will, from web.xml file, it has some configurations details here. Here we have one URL pattern, A servlet. For this URL pattern, we have one servlet name here. This servlet name we assign for which servlet class? A servlet class, right? So then your Tomcat container need to do what? It need to execute A servlet. So how it will execute your A servlet? Will it create a new object, or else already existing object it is going to use here? It depends. I don't have any load and startup for my servlet classes. If you don't have any load and startup here, then your servlet object still not available in your container until first user request. Okay, if you don't have any load and startup here, container will not create servlet object. At the time of starting time, it will not create any object. So when first user request, first user request, I got a request A servlet. Tomcat container then do what? For this A servlet URL pattern, whatever the servlet name we have here, that servlet name it will read, then it will create your servlet object. So then what it will do? It will create one object for A servlet. It will create A servlet object. It will create A servlet object because we are requesting using A servlet pattern. If you request by using B servlet pattern, instead of passing this request, if you pass this request http://localhost:8080/hello world/B servlet, then it will create your B servlet object. Okay, if it is a first time I am requesting for A servlet, first time I am requesting for B servlet. Again, once again, if I request for A servlet, will it going to create one more new object here? No. Whatever the existing object we have here, that same object again it will use. Okay. Once if you write any code in your servlet, and your servlet object it is going to create only one time. Who will create only one single object? Your servlet container. Your servlet container will create only one single servlet object. When it will create? At the time of first time request. When first user first request. When first user first request, it will create your servlet object. And again if you request for the same servlet, it will not create one more object. So your servlet object is singleton. You can call it as singleton. Your object is singleton, but class is not a singleton. Okay, your servlet object, it will create only one single servlet object. Okay, once after creation of your servlet object, what it will do? There are 3 lifecycle methods for servlets. So for each servlet, we can have these 3 lifecycle methods. Those lifecycle methods are init, service, and destroy. Okay, just I'll keep this a servlet here. You understand, right, about servlet context and config? So here if you have a servlet class hello world, if you try to implement it from servlet interface, how many methods need to implement here? And one more thing, while writing your servlet classes, they should be public. In interviews, definitely they will ask this question. If you keep default class, it is not useful. Okay, whatever the class you are going to write inside this classes folder, that all servlet classes must be public classes. Okay, so compulsory, you should not forget to keep public here for your servlet classes. Okay, reason I'll explain later. So here we have one method, public void init method, init with servlet config input. So using this servlet config, what we can expect? What I can expect here? Using this servlet config, just now we discussed, right? Servlet config object input I have here. So using servlet config object, what I can expect for a servlet? Some value we have here, right? Servlet config object data a, and the value is 1, 2, 3. So then using this config object, what I can do? I can read that inputs. Here I have input, right? This input I can read. How I can read? Servlet config object, here I have servlet config dot get init param. There is a method get init param. Here if you pass your key a, the value it will return in the form of string value. What about this value? The value is what? 1, 2, 3. This 1, 2, 3 value it will return here. So whatever the data you have in this web.xml file, that data you can consume from your init method. How we can consume? Under init method there is a input servlet config. Using that servlet config input, you can read your data here. Using this servlet config input, you can read data here. Servlet config dot get init parameter of, pass your param name here, then you can expect param value. In future if you want to change the value, you can make changes on the values here. Okay, and yeah, after init method, we have one more method. The method name is what? Public void service. So inside the service method, it will pass servlet requested data and whatever the data we need to send as a response. That servlet response object it will give to us. Along with throws servlet exception, comma IO exception. So for what we should use this service method? User requested operations need to execute from this service method itself. So if I request from any browser for a servlet, why I should request from there? I need to execute some task, right? Whatever the task you need to execute, the task you need to write here. Means whatever the data you are getting from your user interface. Let's say here if you have one UI page and I have a name, email, address. When I submit this form to this servlet, when I submit for registration, what is my task here? I need to register the data. So for each parameter, we need to have one param name. So if it is P1 and if it is P2 and if it is P3. Using this parameter names, I need to read data inside service method. Who will make available this data to my service method? We know, right, what internally happens when I submit this form data, this data it will store under HTTP protocol. That protocol data it will submit to your servlet container. Servlet container will convert this protocol data into servlet request object. So when I submit this form data, whatever the parameters I have here, that parameters it will make available through your servlet request object. So now by using servlet request object, what you can read? By using this parameter names, you can read this parameter values. Getting? So here what you can do, request dot, there is one method get parameter of p1. So then what it will read here? Whatever the value you are going to enter in this text field. So if I enter some text data here, A, B, C, LMN or abc@gmail.com, HYD. So by using this P1 name when I read, it will give us ABC. By using P2 when I read, abc@gmail.com. By using P3 when I read, it will read HYD here. So how we can read all these? String name, string email, request dot, get parameter of P2, then string address, request dot get parameter of P3. Finally, it will read your name, email and address. So here my data I am reading here. After reading this data, if you want to store into database, what you should do? You need to write some JDBC task here. That JDBC will store data into your DB. Finally, we know how to send response. We need to create a response object, print writer object. Using that print writer object, we need to send output. So output here, from here you can send in the form of simple HTML, as a plain text you can send, or else as a PDF you can send, as an audio file, video file, whatever it is. You can send a page also here, from here to here. You can design one page here. You can include some HTTP page here. Then that page also you can forward to your browser. Okay. So finally output we can send in the form of HTML content, or you can send a PDF content, whatever it is. Our required content we can forward from here to here. Okay. So inside service method, our task we need to execute. Whatever the user task, we require to execute, so that same task we need to execute here. And finally there is one more method. Actually we have 5 methods, right? Inside servlet interface. Okay, unit method, service method, destroy method, and get servlet info, get servlet config. Okay, and we have one more important method here, destroy method. Public void destroy. Okay. So in this destroy method, what we should do? Any cleanup operations if you have, while doing shutdown, while shutdowning your container, whenever you try to stop your container, this destroy method will execute. When it will execute? At the time of container shutdown. When that init method will execute? At the time of servlet object creation. While first time servlet object creation, this init method will execute. Not every time. How many times servlet object going to create? Only one time, at first user request. So after creation of your servlet object, immediately it will execute one method. Which method it will execute? Init method. Who will execute? Your servlet container. Servlet container automatically it will execute your init method. Init method not executed by user. Init method executed by your servlet container. Servlet container will execute your init method at the time of object creation. It will create object, then immediately it will make a call on init method. Okay, only one time process it is. So init method, how many times it will execute? Only one time it will execute at the time of your object creation. Okay, and what about service method? Any number of users can register, right? So if 100 users, if they try to register, how many times service method will execute? For 100 users, 100 times it will execute. Okay, so this service method will execute for each user request. And here we have one more method, destroy method. Destroy method, you can use it for doing cleanup operations. You can use it for cleanup operations, and you can use it for initialization operations. So at the time of startup, if you want to initialize anything, you can initialize the data here. Finally, if you want to clean up it, you can clean up from here. And throughout life, you can use it. On servlet live start, you can initialize anything here. On servlet live closing, you can clean up the data here. And throughout its life, you can use the data here. Okay. So while destroying your object, why you need to maintain data? Not required, right? If I open a file input stream object here, once after destroying, once after closing your object itself, why we require that resource? We should close it, right? Compulsory. Without closing, if I forget, if I open a file input stream here, and if I forget, what happens? It will consume some memory, right? Will it JVM do the garbage collection on that file input streams? Your garbage collector is not responsible, right? Resource closing operations responsibility not is there on garbage collector. When you do your garbage collector, when you shut down your JVM and when you start again, then it will clean up it. Until that, it will not clean up your memory. So resource closing operations compulsory you should do here. Okay, garbage collector can remove your objects but not resources. So there is a chance to resource leakage problem. Okay, so you must need to close resources. Where? Under destroy method. If you open resource here, you need to close here. So which kind of resources we need to close? If it is related to sockets, okay, input streams, or else if you open a connection from database, if you open a connection here, then must you need to close that connection here under a destroy method. Okay, and leave about the two methods, servlet config and servlet config. Servlet config and get servlet info and get servlet config methods are not useful here. Okay, but we must need to implement them because it is a interface. Okay, understand? Okay, so again from first, when you start servlet container, what it will do? If you deploy a var file, that var file it will extract and it will deploy your application here, and immediately it will read one web.xml file. Once after reading web.xml file, it will create servlet context object, only one object for entire application. And inside this servlet context object, what it will store here? If you have any context parameters data under web.xml file, yeah, shareable resources data, public data. So that public data where we can configure under web.xml file? Under context parameters. There is one context param tag. In between context param and context param, if you store any data here, that data it will store under servlet context object. And this object is only one for entire application. And for each servlet it will create one servlet config object. If you want to pass any data to servlet config object, we need to use init param. Under init param, by using param name and param value, you can store data here. Okay, that same data it will make available here. So where I can read this data? Under servlet init method, by using servlet config object, you can fetch your data here. Not only under init method, you can make available that same data to service method also. Later I will show you how to read that data. Okay, anywhere in your servlet you can read, but only it will make available to particular servlet. If I keep data a equal to some 1 2 3 here, it is only available to A servlet, not for the B servlet, not for the C servlet. If you put anything here, it is shareable to only A servlet. It is not public data because it is a servlet config. Servlet config is only one for one servlet. Okay, not for entire application. For each servlet, it will create one servlet config object. And okay, then when servlet objects will create? At the time of first time user request, first user call, it will create your servlet object. And again, if you request for the same servlet, will it create one more new object? No, only one object it will create. So once after creation of your hello world object, it will execute immediately init method. So inside init method, if you have any code, that code will executed at the time of your servlet object creation itself. So then whenever user submits his data, that data will submit it to which method? Service method. So the service method will execute for every user request. For every user request, it will execute this service data. So here if you have any code, that code will execute for every user. And finally destroy when you shut down your container. When you shut down your container, it will do what? It will execute all the destroy methods. When you shut down, when you call container shutdown, then it will destroy all the servlets destroy methods. Means it will call all the servlets destroy methods. Finally, when you shut down, it will call the destroy methods. Once after destroying, it will close your servlet objects. It will close your context objects. It will close your config objects. Everything it will clean up. Okay. Once if you shut down, why we need that objects? From garbage? Garbage collector will remove from your JVM heap memory. It will clean up all the memory space. Okay.